start, even if you're drawn to this topic, is a huge sign of the maturity of your soul. Let me start there. Because a shadow work comes to us when we're really ready to do this deep healing, to walk this path of authenticity, right? From my perspective, spiritual awakening is the journey of authenticity. So before we come to the point where we're actually able to have a conversation with each other about our shadow, what we do this. We live under a mask. And not just one mask. We live under many, many, many masks. Maybe one mask with our lover, one mask with our boss, one mask with our children, right? So we all start our adult journey hiding our true self that will be represented by this beautiful white heart. We're hiding our true self behind the protective mask. Why? Because that is a survival mechanism that we learned as children. You know, I'm a big advocate for trauma education and educating and learning to understand that not a single person in the world can escape an effect of trauma, you know, at different degrees, right? So it's very, very powerful for us to understand that mask self is a necessary stage in our evolution. It helps us to a degree, and then when the soul begins to awaken, the soul cannot be contained under the mask. So the soul will urge the mask self to be torn apart or to be dissolved, right? And that's the process. The shadow work and seeing our shadows is seeing new layers of masked self, right? I see new layers of like, oh, which other part of yourself are you still hiding, protecting, or suppressing? And the shadow self, we can also call it subconscious, right? Our subconscious self, something that lives in the basement, right? Lives in, if our crown chakra is our superconscious self, where we connect with the divinity and we feel the energy of spirit, right? Our subconscious self is something that we feel during our dreams or nightmares, right? The more something that is suppressed in our subconscious, the higher are the chances that we will have nightmares, that we will have panic attacks, that we have an anxiety attack. So just a little bit background for you, my loves. I grew up in a very turbulent childhood, like many light workers did. And I had horrible nightmares as a child. Why? Because I had so much trauma growing up. And the only way to survive was to hide under the mask self. You know, there was no tools, there were no role models, there were no validation. They will only suppress what you feel and suffer when you sleep, because when you sleep, your subconscious mind is trying to process it and you experience it as the nightmare. So as a kid, as like 7-year-old child, 8-year-old child, I did sleepwalking. You know, I had nightmares. It was a difficult chapter in my life, you know, because all of those emotions, they have to go somewhere. So I've learned as a kid, in order to survive, I had to be people pleaser, I had to be a peacemaker, and I had to make sure that everybody is okay around me. So my needs not only have been not honored, not validated, but I couldn't even articulate what I needed in the moment. So I'm gonna come back to that, why it's important, because as adults, if we cannot articulate clearly what our needs are, it's gonna be a very, very difficult way to live, right? because the solution, or the result of us not being able to talk about our needs, is that we're either going to be passive aggressive, or we're going to be struggling with anger and rage. So let's talk about the shadows, because I had this question from one of my students. And he said, Katerina, I really don't want to put you on a pedestal. I really don't want to do it, because this person is a healer and he does shadow work on a very consistent basis. He says, but when I look at you and I look how together you are, all this vitality and dynamism and power and confidence, it's like, what are your shadows? Show me your shadows. So beloveds, I wanted to talk about the shadows that I'm personally navigating. I find that there's these core patterns that I see faster, and I'm able to meet the moment when they show up and activate my nervous system, right? So I'm able to meet them in a more effective way and a more authentic way. And what I'm learning through this process, before I reveal to you my 5 shadows, when I'm learning through this process, it's not the goal to get rid of the shadow. It's actually impossible. If we're trying to get rid of the shadow, it's an impossible task. Have you ever tried to get rid of your shadow? You can't. The only way you can do it is by stepping fully into the light. So our awareness is the light that illuminates the shadow, right? So the more we are aware of the patterns that show up, the more we can become curious, right? What drives that behavior? What's unmet need drives this pattern? And then you can go and address unmet need, right, darlings? So I know I'm breaking it down. I'm still speaking very, very brush strokes, but I wanted to start there because our shadow self contains a lot of power. And when we dare to look at it with curiosity, with humility, with even, I would say, reverence, you know what happens? We activate our primal strength. We activate our deep, deep brilliance, because Kundalini, the Kundalini that has been, talked about through many, many centuries by all spiritual avatars and teachers as the divinity current within us, that will come up through our subconscious to create this tunnel of light and connect us to the superconscious mind, right? So if you desire an activation of Kundalini, if you desire that sensuous vitality, we gotta do this work of becoming curious with our shadow and becoming dancers, becoming shadow dancers. So let's dive into the shadow. I love you. Thank you so much for being here with me. Yeah, we have a lot of Gene Key lovers here. I absolutely will touch on some of the shadows. Some of them I have, I have them twice. But I'm gonna start with the first one, the one that is most vulnerable for me to admit publicly. I'm gonna go there. So the first shadow that is challenging for me to work with is shadow of pride. Shadow of pride. It's incredibly difficult for me to feel, to be seen in my weakness. Let's just say, it's almost like it's so excruciating, difficult for me. If I say, you know what, if I share something, I will be perceived as weak. So being a double Leo, I'm always fascinated by astrology. When clients come to me, students come to me, I look up at the astrology, numerology, life paths, the whole shebang. Why? Because I want to understand, the energies that they channel and the energies that they receive through their astrology, right? So it's a double Leo, right? Leos are very prideful beings. And Leos hate to be ignored, and Leos hate to be seen weak. So, for example, when I feel low in my emotions, or I feel insecure, or I feel inadequate, or I feel confused, all I want is to hide in my cave and kind of lick my wounds, right? So there was a huge pattern of isolation for me. For many, many years, I would go through extremes of being very, very social and then deeply introverted. Don't talk to me, like, don't ask me these questions. And I would just really isolate. And I remember when there were years in my life when I struggled with depression, my very first depression that took me to my knees. And it was my first dark night of the soul that brought a lot of humility and a lot of compassion for anybody who goes through depression. It was the same thing. My pride would not allow me to ask for help. So how does the shadow of pride gets in the way? You're not gonna ask for help. You're gonna probably keep the mask of I got it all together. And how does this can get away in the leadership? Well, the pride, what happens if we hold on to the pride? Pride happens before the fall. A lot of times if we don't catch this pattern of pride, right, then it just goes to the inflation of ego. And then the only way that ego can be humbled by great spirit, right, is we experience some kind of fall, usually a public fall on your face, right, where you make epic failure or giant fool of yourself. And so the pride is incredibly challenging, darlings. So I'm gonna tell a little bit how I work with each shadow after I name the 5 ones. So if you ever meet Leo or any fire sign, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, fire signs, usually that's the weak, that's like Achilles heel for us, is the pride. And so it could be a story, like somebody doesn't give me personally, attention in the way that I'd like to receive. My mind will go into judgment, create a story, and and the feeling of being ignored. Just it's just, if you have moon in Leo, if you have Leo rising, you will connect to that, right? So pride, when I see people come for relationship help, I'm not a relationship expert, but when I see people come for relationship coaches, when the relationship is in such almost barely repairable state. Why? Because of pride. Because of pride keeps people away from asking for help when you can actually do something about a problem instead of waiting until your ego is just like so defensive. You're gonna wait until you fall on the ground and hit your face. So pride is the number 1 shadow for me, loves. And I will tell you how I work with it. So the second shadow for me is intolerance. Big one. Intolerance or righteousness, and that comes from maybe just having growing up with so little, and feeling like I had to fight for everything in life. Nothing was ever presented on a silver platter. And I think a lot of light workers, we grow up like that. We choose very, very difficult beginnings to accelerate the quest for our spiritual mission. If we choose too comfy of environments, a comfort doesn't bring out the fire that needed for the human spirit to go on the hero's journey. You know what I mean? So intolerance shows up for me when I hear somebody complaining, or where I hear somebody being an entitlement. And I see this intolerance in me, like the judgment comes up, and I will just, it's hard, intolerance, or, somebody says something or somebody expresses themselves in a way that feels to me like entitlement, I could see how my mind goes into judgment, you know, and I'll be like, well, if you just had a little bit more willpower or discipline, you wouldn't be here, right? So this shadow gets in a way for me as a teacher. So it's a constant purification of the shadow, because if you work as a teacher, you gotta cultivate an incredible level of patience, right? Because every person grows and unlocks their power uniquely to them, and it's absolutely unfair to compare the way you unlocked your power to how somebody else can, right? So be sensitive. Exactly, Veronica, be sensitive. So intolerance, darlings, I struggle with that shadow, and it comes up as a mental judgment. And again, you know, after I share them, I will share with you how I deal with it, right? And then judgment. Judgment has been the earliest shadow that I became aware of. And I literally, I felt like I suffered with a very judgmental mind. And again, it's a survival mechanism, you know, like I remember from like age of 12, I had a very loud and judgmental mind. So I would walk around the town and I would hear this judging voice, you know, oh, look at this person, how they dressed. Oh my God, this person is so fat. Oh my God, you should not wear this. And it's like a commentary that happens in your mind, and you feel completely helpless to stop it. Let me know if you ever experienced that, because this is the voice of the ego. This is the voice of the judgment. And then you judge yourself because you have that voice, and you feel completely helpless. So all of these shadows, what do they show us? What do they show us? Well, you know, if you struggle, for me it was a huge liberation to realize all of those judgments that I heard in my head, it was the judgments of my own self that I didn't realize that I had, you know, because of the when we hold on to the mask self says, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. Everything is fine. Oh yeah, I'm fine. It's fine. It's fine. Never mind. Never mind. When you hear that, forget it. I shouldn't have even asked. Shouldn't have brought it up. Mask self. Because it's so much more freaking painful to say, I am terrified to reveal this aspect of myself, because if I do, I feel like I'm gonna lose my connection with you, and I feel like you will always hold this against me. That's the deep fear underneath it, right? That's the deep fear underneath it. That if I'm gonna take the mask off and I'm gonna show this vulnerable, raw self that is imperfect, you will not be able to accept what you see, and you're either gonna judge me, hold this against me in the future, or walk away. Isn't that what we're all afraid of? That's why true vulnerability is so scary. Not the vulnerability for the sake of, I am a social media influencer, once in a while I gotta get vulnerable and share something awkward about myself. You know what I mean? Trust me, I've done that in the past. True vulnerability sometimes feel like you are tearing down a part of your soul, and you don't know if you can patch it back in. But that's what connects us, one human heart to another human heart. Next, my loves, we are going to the next shadow, number 4. Oh, shadow number 4, rigidity. rules, control. So whenever you meet somebody who feels like a control freak, I guarantee you there is an unhealed inner child. They may look so powerful and so in charge and like they know that do, but it's just inflexible in a world because it's frozen, baby. Inflexible in a world is frozen in numbness. So when you meet somebody who has rigidity, right, it's just they're so afraid to feel, my darlings. They're so afraid to feel. I remember myself after my divorce, when I was 28 years old, so almost 12 years ago. Yeah, 12 years ago. I couldn't cry for 2 years physically. I tried to squeeze out a tear. I tried to squeeze. I'm like, they said crying helps, and nothing would come out because I felt like from here all the way to my solar plexus, everything turned into cement. So do you think I became rigid for the next 7 years? You better believe it. I had so many rules because I got hurt so deeply during that divorce that I said, no mother effing person will ever hurt me this way. And I better build a lot of defenses that nobody can get in, and it's gonna look like rules. You gotta approach me this way, not this way. You gotta talk me this way, but not this way. And it was all presented with a nice, polite mask. So skillful, so lonely. Because it's very difficult to build true intimacy with somebody who is very rigid, with somebody who has a lot of rules. There is not enough playfulness, there is not enough joy, flexibility, spontaneity, right? Sensuality, kundalini, that woo! My loves, that's why hurt people who have been deeply hurt, it's a very natural stage for them to become rigid for a time. It's a natural state. It's not wrong. Like how do we illuminate the shadow? We bring light to it. We become aware. Wow, that's what's happening. But then you become to realize, wow, do I want to be rigid? Or do I want to be radiant? What do I want to be? If I want to be radiant, I gotta become more real. I gotta become more authentic. And that means I gotta let go of some of my rules. I gotta let go of some of that talk, that says, hey, if you didn't do this, or if you did do this, I am gone. I'm gonna cut you off, right? I'm walking away. That's the rigidity. Instead, you shift into, what if next time I'm gonna offer a little bit of empathy to realize that, sometimes empathy can go in a deep, deep way. So rigidity, loves, whenever you meet somebody very rigid with lots of rules, it's deep, deep healing that is still yet to happen. And I sometimes catch myself in that, it's almost like the protection it's like, imagine that you have like a program in the software of your body, of your subconscious mind, that when something that looks like past danger shows up, your entire nervous system goes on alert, and you begin to tap into what does it mean, and assign meaning to everything, and all self-protection. So the next shadow, if you just joined, loves, I was talking about my 5 biggest shadows. First one is pride, right? Second, intolerance. Third, judgment. Fourth, rigidity. And the fifth one, the one that I am really, really alchemizing lately, is coldness. Coldness. And it's like when something happens, somebody says something, especially if it's your intimate partner, or they didn't show up in the way you wait for it, expected them to show up, right? Something begins to freeze in you and you withdraw your affection. And you withdraw your affection. And it's a form of control. It's a form of punishment. It's a form of holding on and being right. I am right in this situation. You deserve my coldness. I'm gonna withdraw my affection and I'm gonna make you feel it. How many of you recognize that shadow pattern? It's so humbling, and it's so humbling, especially when you feel it. If you're the one who's been always using that pattern, it's only a matter of time where you're gonna drink your own medicine. And it's freaking painful. It's so painful. So pride, intolerance, judgment, rigidity, coldness. And what happens, loves, for me personally, now I'm gonna share with you the process. For me, I go into shame. So when I catch myself in one of these shadows, I personally tend to go into shame. And a shame is like this tidal wave of feeling like you are a bad person, and you just revealed your lower self. You just showed like a really, really low part of yourself, and it was seen, right? It was seen, and now again it can be taken against you, right? Oh. So, my loves, when these shadows show up, when? Have you ever asked yourself, where is your lower self show up the fastest? Who can activate your shadow self the fastest? Is it your friend? Or is it your lover? Anybody with whom you share intimacy has the capacity to trigger your shadow the fastest. That is why relationships are given to us to test our embodiment. Yeah, to test our embodiment. You see, there will be chapters in our journey where we will be required to go through solitary chapter, where you go into a spontaneous, conscious, intentional celibacy. Very natural experience on the path of evolutionary consciousness, where you say, you know what, I'm going through accelerated ascension, and for accelerated ascension, it's me and my essence self, and we're just gonna alchemize and focus and really deepen our practices, right? But then it's a temporary chapter. Then there will be a chapter where you will be invited by your essence self to test your practices, to test your embodiment. And if you stay in isolation and avoid relationships because they're messy, because they're imperfect, because they can trigger your shit, you will never realize your blind spots. You will never realize your embodiment. You know, it's loves how many times I thought that I was so much further along an evolutionary journey. And the moment I am with the lover, I'm like, woo, wow, look at this pride and intolerance, judgment, rigidity, coldness. Look at all the shame sprinkling on top of all of it. So my current understanding, my loves, is that I want to kiss the feet, and I bow down to the feet to every divine lover who triggers my shit and who helps me see my stuckness, who helps me see my coldness, who helps me see my rigidity. And in the moment, I don't want to kiss their feet. When that happens, all I want to do is hold on to my righteousness or my anger or my processing, right? And then once I move through the turbulent waves and actually can see clearly, I begin to see the perfection of the design, what's happening. So with the shadow dancing, how do we do the shadow dancing, right? I find that my shadow patterns show up the fastest for me to see in intimate relationships. Also when I am stressed, when I'm holding a lot, it's a great, you know, it's almost like you experience a walking on ice. When you're holding a lot, whether you are going through expansion in your leadership or your business is just going through huge expansion and all attention on you, it can be an experience of walking on thin ice. So you gotta slow down to become really aware of your shadow patterns, especially pride, right? So just slow down, you're walking on a thin ice, and deepen your spiritual practices. When the shadow shows up, when these patterns that shows up, and shadows is the aspects of ourselves we don't want to look at. We would rather not look at them. We'd rather not talk about them. We'd rather pretend they don't exist. But the shadow aspects of ourselves, they can be transformed, and then they can be alchemized, right? And they can, the wisdom of and the gift that each shadow has. For example, I had a request to talk about Gene Key 59, shadow of dishonesty, that every single human being has. We're all dishonest, all of us, but not in a way how we may think. You know, when I saw the shadow of dishonesty twice in my profile, at first I was like, what? Integrity is like my highest value. Growth and integrity is my highest value. I was like, dishonesty? What? You know? So you can't really see it. And then when I contemplated on that, I said, whoa, you're right, Richard Rudd. Dishonesty is a pattern of not being authentic with ourselves. Dishonesty is where we hold on to the image, where, you know, when we are hurting or our needs are not met, and instead of revealing our soul and risking the loss of connection with your lover or with your parent or with your child, you do this. I'm fine. Oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Oh, forget it. It's okay. And then you put it under the rug, right? And that energy doesn't go anywhere. It builds, it grows in power. That's the power of unaddressed shadow. It turns into this energy that is just looking to erupt. So I've been really focusing on this shadow of dishonesty, and dishonesty is like, how transparent are you about what you feel in the moment? So I recently shared this experience. I went through initiation by fire, beloveds. First time in my life, literally first time in my life, I leaned into a huge, excruciating vulnerability of actually telling my lover that some of my needs were not being met. And I was grieving not being seen by him in the way that I crave to be seen. And it was so vulnerable for me to share, but it was a huge, huge progress on my journey, because probably for the first time, I was able to name honestly how I felt when I felt it, not 6 months later, but in the moment. And you know what? I didn't do it perfectly. It wasn't received in the way I wished it was received. I wouldn't change a single thing, because to me, it was such huge opening in my heart, in my consciousness, in that level of authenticity, right? And that's what intimacy is, because the gift of dishonesty is intimacy, where you can reveal your soul. It's easy to show your power. For me personally, it's very easy to show my power. It's very easy to show my creativity. It's very easy to show my quick mind, right? But to show the moments where I don't feel seen, to ask for support from my lover, this is incredibly vulnerable for me, because as a child, my needs didn't matter. As a child, to ask for my needs felt incredibly scary and unsafe. So when I am in a lovership and I don't feel in particular space of support, I want to name it, but it brings up all the moments and all the times where I asked for it and it wasn't met. And it takes incredible strength to stay in the fire of that process, and to be okay for that process not to go the way you think it will, because it won't. You can't really control the shadow. You can dance with it, right? For example, think about the dance. When you are dancing, can you control the dance? Come on. How awkward would that be? You only can flow with the dance, right? So with your shadow, when it shows up and you express yourself in a unique way or in an authentic way, and you don't feel received and the shame comes over, what do you do? What do you do? You want to find it in your body, beloved. For some reason, I immediately start holding my belly and my womb space. You want to find it in the body, and you want to give yourself the one greatest gift, and it's a gift of self-parenting. Especially if you have not been seen as a child. This is the deepest trauma for so many adults, is that we have not been really seen by our parents. And the more weird you were, the more galactic you were, the more star-seeded being you were, you probably incarnated into a family who had zero capacity to see you. To me, it was so liberating to come to terms that my biological family literally had zero capacity to see my galactic self. And to come to terms with that is to unhook yourself from disappointment of not being seen. Then you can begin to understand, then you can begin to heal, then you can begin to release, right? So you self-parent, right? That's why we keep talking about the inner child. You hold yourself. I really love this very simple practice Okay. Whew. There's so much energy is coming through me. I really love this simple practice where you hold. So you put one hand here, one hand here. So literally, one hand here, one hand here. Let's do it together. Don't waste the moment, my loves. Your subconscious mind and your body consciousness does not know the difference who is holding you. Babies do not survive without touch. Why do we think as adults we can thrive without touch? Greatest illusion. And then while I hold myself, I imagine a blanket of love. I call in whoever is my most dearest guide. Usually it's Kunyan, the female Buddha of compassion. And she knows the power of suffering. And I call her and I ask her to hold me. So all this to say, my darlings, I will never do a business deal, leadership partnership, romantic partnership with somebody who doesn't know their shadow. Never. If I consider a business deal, leadership partnership, romantic union, I will ask them, show me your shadow. Tell me your 5 biggest shadows and how you work with them. It's so liberating and it's so powerful when we realize that these patterns are given to us to heal, not only for ourselves, but for our lineages, for our family lines, for our cultural lineages. It's a part of the wound, right, that we get to heal here. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share, my loves. These are the 5, right? And the beauty of acceptance, what I'm realizing is it's not about never losing your shit, forgive my French, but how can I tell this in a more direct way? For me, another part that I struggle to accept through the years is my intensity. And loves, a lot of times you see this, you see a lot of nurturing mother energy during my live streams, but there is another side of me that is very intense. And some of my students and some of my, if you ever took some of my business trainings, you may have felt that in strength, that fierceness that comes through, right? I'm becoming more and more accepting that my intensity is okay. I chosen it for a reason. I chosen it for a purpose. It's helping me in my leadership, and some people will not be able to stand in that. For example, I've realized that for me, when it comes to a romantic partner, what is important, the partner that I will choose. I'm in the place where I feel this sacred union that anchoring inside of me, right? And there's all of these opportunities for discernment. It's one thing to have beautiful sensual attraction with somebody. Another thing is is this person able to stand in the fire of alchemy with me? Because alchemy and the shadow transmutation, as 2 expansive consciousness come together, it's only going to be a matter of time where you begin to trigger your deepest core wounds. And this is why the union, the intimate union, is a crucible. It's a cauldron of transformation. it's both, right? It's the most incredible ecstasy where you merge your body, your mind, and your soul into that tantric bliss, right? But you also reach into each other deepest wounds, and there's 5 core wounds that every couple will be faced with. It's a whole other transmission that I can speak on. You know, people talk about sacred unions, but you know what it takes to anchor in a sacred union is to meet each one of those 5 wounds and not run away and not blame each other and not turn away, right? So that's why you hear those, you know, twin flame unions. One is running, one is chasing, then they take turns, and then they can't anchor the sacred union, blah, 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 blah. So when you actually see a couple who anchored in that sacred union transmission and that partnership, is like, wow. You can learn a lot. And when you ask them how much shadow transmutations have you been doing lately, I guarantee you they can tell a lot of stories that it's a lot of shadow transmutation. But that's how we transform, that's how we grow. So my loves, how can we enjoy this process? I think part of this is just by becoming authentic and making it normal. You know, that every person that you think is perfection has some deep, edgy stuff that they work with. Every person that you look up to, every person I look up to, is grieving something, is afraid of something, is at loss because of something, maybe is going through some deep wounding. That's why, you know, that expression, everybody you meet silently battles something within. I think it's very correct. You know, that empathy. I take a stand for bringing more humanity in our leadership. Yes, darlings, 5 wounds. Carmen says, please also talk about these 5 wounds in the future. The sacred union, the 5 wounds, you got it. You got it. Yeah. The very first 2 I will name, Carmen. The very first 2 that gets triggered immediately in a sacred union is betrayal and abandonment. Abandonment is for the female. It's the first wound that's going to be triggered if a woman begins to open her heart. Woman begins to open her heart, or let's just say a feminine being. I don't want to just say it's a man and a woman. It could be 2 women, 2 men, right? Or let's just say a being who identifies with the feminine essence more will go into facing the deep wound of abandonment. And it's not just abandonment of you, it's abandonment of every single feminine being alive through the history. That's where you know you're tapping into some deep, deep, profound wound. That's how it feels, right? And for masculine, it's betrayal. You know what brings up? I wanted to share with you the very first time I stole something. I was 7 years old. And I was invited to, seriously, that's the first time I experienced my shadow. And I went to a friend's party and I saw a Lego piece. And that Lego piece felt so seductive. This force came over me and I just took it. And I kept it for 24 hours. And I felt immense guilt. So it was my first experience, 7 years old, first experience of taking something that is not mine, feeling incredible guilt and remorse, and then having no courage to admit what I did. But I went back to my friend's home, sneaked in, and put the Lego piece back. You know, at 7 years old, our angels, our guardian angels, actually step back and encourage us to make mistakes like this. So we get to see our human nature. We get to see that we are gods and goddesses in mortal shape and a mortal costume. So we better find out all these capacities of a human experience. I love you, beloveds. Was this useful for you? Let me know in the comments. You know, what I'm finding is seeing these patterns and then addressing them in a way that you take full responsibility. You know, so for example, when I shared something with my lover in a way that felt super direct, like my warrior came through, and I was so direct, thinking that this person can take it, right? And then I was like, oh crap, I think I unleashed my Leo fire, and that was a lot. And when I actually had a chance to speak from a more calm essence, I addressed it and I said, hey, you know what? After looking at it from this perspective, I wish I could go into the past, and I wish I said it with more empathy. So what I'm realizing, my darlings, it's not about never losing your centeredness. It's about having the dignity to say, I wish I could go to the past and say it with humility and say it with empathy. Please accept this apology. You know, next time I'm gonna approach this topic with more sensitivity, right? So, let's take a deep breath together. And then when the shadow attacks me and I drive somewhere in the car, I start doing these. I promise you. Thank goodness I rarely have the passenger in my car. So it's just me and this primal sounds. And it's like, the less you care how you look in this moment, the better it is. You are just connecting with the energy. You're pushing it out through the sound, through exhalation, through being you, right? So that's the physical. If you're on the shame attack, if you're on the attack, if you're on the guilt attack, the very first thing you can do is just start doing these sounds. Right? You're moving the energy. You're not just letting it spin in your head. And then when you come home, you put the headphones in and dance. So when I was moving, loves, last week was incredibly stressful for me. My abandonment wound came up. I didn't feel supported. I had everything taken care of. I hired movers. You know, I'm a sovereign woman. I can take care of myself. But it doesn't mean my inner child within didn't have the moments of feeling not supported. So what I did when I was going through a stressful time last week, really stressful, I danced. I danced every night. I put my headphones in and I was dancing, and I was stepping into that ancient tribal awareness that when people were in stress and in pain and in worry, they danced. So let's never forget that we can dance our pain, we can dance our stress, we can exhale it. And you know what? We can also talk to each other in a very authentic way. So when you suffer, you don't have to do it alone, and you don't think that something's so wrong with you, that you're not evolved enough. You keep finding yourself in these patterns. I am there with you. We're moving through this together. And it's actually a sign of maturation of your consciousness that you are drawn to this topic and you are ready to bring light to your shadow. I love you, beloveds. It's 1 hour. I love you so much. I'm going to look through the questions and come back to you with a different live stream that specifically answers the questions, or I record a podcast. How does it sound? Because I know we've been gone for an hour. I love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, feel free to share this live stream with anybody who you think will benefit. And if what I shared benefited you, or if what I shared triggered you, if what I shared inspired you, then what I shared was useful, right? And may we find our healing, may we find our healing, may we find our compassion. So we don't hide from our shadow. It only grows bigger when we hide from it, but we embrace it and we begin to make this courageous journey of unfreezing our hearts. We unfreeze our inner world and we become more alive, we become more passionate, we become more sensual, we become more tantric, right? That is the joy and the great reward of dancing with our shadow. We become more authentic, we become more real, we become more magnetic, we become more beautiful. You know why? Because real people are beautiful. Real people are beautiful. Authenticity is so beautiful. To me, it's becoming more and more beautiful. I love you. Thank you. Until next, my loves.